struggle for supremacy fascinating. Feel your life carry. I find the struggle for supremacy fascinating. Stop and hunt. That's what I'm all like. Entertain me. Temporal tears. Another challenger? Twin terrors. Handle this. Grip of the infinite. Temporal tears. Oh, a glorious spectacle.
Hello and welcome Exiles to my first build for the 10 Div Challenge for Crucible League. I did this last league, we had a lot of fun with it. The idea of the 10 Div Challenge is basically 10 divine budget, try to make something wacky, something not meta, something I haven't done before, and see how well it can do against Ubers, the hardest content in the game. For this build, I did an Occultist, and I decided, you know what, there's a lot of wacky things in Crucible. I wanted to build around this consecrated path Purifying Flame node that basically converts all the fire damage to chaos. And I decided, you know what, I haven't played a Trapper all league. I haven't seen many people play Trappers outside of the Totem build, which just has one too many zeros on the damage number. Let's go ahead and try to make a Occultist Chaos Purifying Flame Trapper. That's the idea I went with. And I decided I would go ahead and try to stack some power charges, use Badge of the Brotherhood. I think it's really good to do Badge of the Brotherhood with trap builds because Charge Trap gives a lot of basically throw speed and multi. It ends up being a very, very extremely strong link, and it pairs very nicely with Badge of the Brotherhood. So that was my idea there. And then on top of that, if I'm a cultist, I have power charge stacking, so it works out decently. Not only that, but if you're wondering, hey, how do you have 10 power charges? Wouldn't that be expensive? Believe it or not, +1 power charge on a random rare isn't really expensive. This base cost me 100C, and +1 power charge on a random base for a shield, that isn't too expensive either. This costs 2 divines. It was one of my most expensive items, but in the grand scheme of things, that's not very expensive for a plus power charge item. If you're thinking, man, that should be really expensive, well, you're probably thinking of rings. Rings with +1 power charge, now those cost 100 plus divines, much more expensive. I don't know why the +1 power charge isn't very valued on a rare helmet or a rare shield, but it just isn't. So that's what we went with here on our build. And then outside of that, I decided to do Feral's Fur plus Sunblast. Sunblast means none of your traps trigger on enemies. They have to wait the whole duration they last. They last 1.2 seconds, according to my tooltip here, with a 70% reduced trap duration. This thing is a 20C belt, but I have to say, after using it, I'm not sure it's the greatest with Purifying Flame. Basically, there's an issue of Purifying Flame. I thought the AoE would have been big enough, but I don't really end up feeling like it was big enough. Because, like, say if a boss, like, slightly moved over here, I'd lose pretty much all the extra damage I'm getting because only, like, one of my traps would be hitting because they don't target the enemy because they're not triggered by the enemy. Normally, if you have a trap that gets triggered by an enemy, the Purifying Flame will then shoot at that enemy. And I don't really know if I had consistently, like, hits. And also, Sunblast forces me into something like Feral's Fur to generate my charges, because normally you would generate your charges with something like Charge Trap, whereas in the case of this, the belt makes it so your enemies don't trigger the traps, thus you don't get the proc for. Supported skills have a 30% chance to gain a power charge when your trap is triggered by an enemy. Technically, it does get procced by skitterbots, but I don't know if it's that consistent or reliable. That's just what I've noticed. Maybe if I got 100% charge duration, maybe it would be a reliable way, and I wouldn't have to do Feral's Fur, and I could do some other chest, but all in all, that was the idea of what was going on here. Also, Feral's Fur, I got a +2 AoE. This cost me 3 divines. There were basically about 3 chests up for 4 divines. I made the first guy an offer for 3, and he was like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And I'm like, okay, that's cool, I will take that. But ultimately, if I was going to go back and redo this, I think I wouldn't do Sunblast, and I wouldn't do Feral's Fur. I'd be more tempted to do a Tinker Skin for, like, that extra big sustain, or maybe even a rare chest, something like that. So that's my thought process on these items. And then last but not least, the other cool item I'm doing is Blood Dance. Since we're a trap-based character, we don't really care about the cast or attack speed from frenzy charges because we need throw speed. And thus we can feel fine sacrificing that to get a bunch of regen. I get about 8% life regen per second from this, which is decent for sustain. And then on top of that, we get some movement speed, but more importantly, we get 28% damage per frenzy against hits against enemies that are on low life. Basically, that means if you get halfway through the fight, you start dealing a lot more damage to enemies, and that's pretty noticeable considering we don't have an overly crazy amount of percent damage in our build. So that's the idea with the gear choices. Outside of that, the main things I'm doing here is getting Aspect of Cat on one of my items. I'm getting some resistances. I needed strength to meet an attribute requirement, getting some chaos res. All in all, our character ends up being a res capped mostly. We're not res capped for fire, but don't look at that. It's fine. We're res capped mostly. We have 100% suppression chance. If we go off full life, we go to 92% suppression chance. But my concept here was basically, if I have phasing, which I have half the time with the Aspect of the Cat anyways, I have 8% suppress, and if I've suppressed recently, I have phasing, which that makes me go from 92 to 100% for fairly pretty much consistent 100% suppress cap. I could also go for lucky suppress if I just wanted a more consistent like 99% suppression chance, but I thought this was pretty good because it gives phasing. I think phasing is really important in a trap-based character because traps, ultimately, they're just going to be an awkward playstyle. I made them more awkward with doing Sunblast because it's a longer duration before they go off, but even outside of Sunblast, traps typically you have to throw at a pack and then you have to keep moving. And ideally, to keep moving through that pack, you really want phasing or you want shield charge or flame dash, and combining all three makes it so you can throw traps on a pack and keep moving, and that's the idea there. Outside of all that, the only other thing I can think of that we went for that's kind of special on this build, I wanted to try out recoup, so I got basically around, I think it's 54% recoup on my tree, and then another 28% from my ring, so I have close to 80% recoup, so I'm trying out a combination of 80% recoup with Ghost Shrouds. Granted, I don't have great evasion. I only have about 15,000 evasion, or if I have my Jade Flask, about 19,000. Isn't overly crazy for evasion. I think it's decent in terms of mitigation for attacks, even if it's not super high. And then Ghost Shrouds giving 500 ES back when we get hit feels nice. And then on top of that, we have a little bit of regen from things like Blood Dance and a Life Flask for backup if all else fails. So that's my idea for my sustain package. It's recoup plus regen plus Ghost Dance. It works out decently, I think. And then we also have some ES on suppress, which is okay as well. Outside of that, I don't think there's anything super special about my tree. I'm not sure this is worth it. This is probably a mistake on my end. I originally was planning to do Wind Dancer, but I didn't feel like Wind Dancer was worth it with the lack of... I didn't have quite enough evasion. I feel like for Wind Dancer, you kind of want like 85% evasion and then use an Evasion Watcher's Eye to get like 90% plus evasion. I think that's when Wind Dancer starts to feel good. So ultimately, I'm looking at this right now, and this is really ugly. I probably would change this in... if I was to go back, but it's too late now. I already did the test with Ubers. So this character ended up doing... Oh, also we get Shock Immunity here, and then we get Chill or Freeze Immunity and Chill Reduction from Soul of Brine King, along with the ability to mitigate stuns if I've been stunned recently, as well as ignoring the first stun if we haven't been hit recently. So that, for the most part, makes stuns not feel too bad. And that is the total package of what the character is doing. As for the 10 Div Challenge test, I go ahead and I tested on the 7 Ubers. We did 5 out of 7. We did all but Exarch and Cirrus. And Cirrus and Exarch, we both got to Cull range. I think Cull is kind of cheap to try to finish off the challenge that way, so I didn't do that. Instead, I went in there and I bricked it. And yeah, there we go. That was good. But outside of that, I'm pretty happy with how this character performed. All in all, doing Ubers on 10 Divs challenges it's pretty hard to pull off, and I'm pretty happy with how it did. And I will go ahead and give you guys a showcase on Uber Shaper. In my opinion, out of all the Ubers, Uber Shaper is probably the easiest in my opinion, but it can get pretty dicey depending on if you're lower on DPS and the ground effect starts to cover the entire arena. But I'll go ahead and show you guys what this character looks like when doing a Uber Shaper real quick here. I will say this, it's also, I did have a bit of a mana problem when my character, originally I was doing Itzuri's Promise instead of this Mana Flask. I think in hindsight that was a mistake. I had too much of a mana problem where I kept getting limited on throwing traps. And ultimately this Mana Flask kind of fixes that, so... We kill him? Okay, sweet. We can kill him before he teleports. That's kind of nice. It's always annoying when that guy teleports away and you have to go find him. It's a whole thing. So I'm glad we were able to take him out in the first phase. This guy is... Alright, took that guy out, that's fine. Also, it works fine. A sunblast works pretty well for big damage if the enemy stands still. But you have to do this like weird timing of like throwing a set of traps and then throwing another set of traps, because otherwise we throw too fast and we actually outthrow the speed at which they can occur. So you gotta be kind of careful of that, which I'm not great at being careful of. I'm probably overthrow it sometimes, and sometimes I'm not throwing optimally amount. And this just goes into the part where I'm like, I'm not sure sunblast is really the play. It feels super awkward. All in all, trapper builds are always going to feel a bit more awkward than regular builds. It's never going to be your S tier clear. Oftentimes trappers can leverage their other advantages though, which is doing a lot of damage generally. They're pretty good at dealing damage, and that's usually something they can be specialized in somewhat. I'm gonna try to not break this, but we'll see how I do. It's gonna do a phase. For phases, I think I should do... That seems fine. Okay, and he's phased. I'm gonna get better at it, but the sunblast, I think these characters are characters I'm putting together basically in one day, and we're not really practicing playing the characters. We do like a couple maps with a couple T16s, get some Pantheons, stuff like that, but outside of that, I don't really have much practice with the character. Basically just went straight into Ubers and was relying on what I know about how to play Ubers to do the content. So that affects me a little bit, but luckily I view Uber Shaper as a warm-up because it's the easier one, so that way I get some playtime in it. It doesn't iron out all the kinks of playstyle errors. There's probably stuff I could get better at, like hindsight of saying, oh, I'm not sure I like Sunblast here. I'm not sure the extra trap throws is really benefiting me enough, because I'm not sure the extra trap throws are actually hitting. I think I'm losing damage there, stuff like that. But regardless, we send it and we see how it turns out. Try to basically push ourselves to try different ways of building characters. Ultimately, my biggest goal for this is to get better as a player in terms of learning new ways to build characters, as well as try out new things. Because a lot of times in PoE, you can get stuck in a rut where you have one thing, you know you like that thing, and you just keep going back and doing it. And when you do that, you're never really going to learn. You're never really going to develop as better in different areas. And I want to be well-rounded and getting better at stuff I'm bad at. There's areas where I'm still really bad at, and I haven't done a very good job of getting better at them, like getting better at doing minions per se, or getting better at doing where is he? He's over here. Okay. We almost phased him, but not quite. Oh no. I'm in danger. Okay, we're fine. Almost bricked. I'm extremely close to breaking there. Luckily, we just didn't. Okay. And he's phased. I think we're good to go. Alright, see if we can clean out this Uber Shaper without dying. His last phase is always his hardest, so we will see how that goes. Granted, his last phase is also when I get the extra 30% per frenzy damage from my boots, so I pick up in damage as well. Even though the fight gets a little bit harder, we will be dealing a decent amount more damage, and we'll see how it goes. I will say this, as far as rules are for the 10 Div Challenge, in case people are wondering, where's the budget? How is that defined? The things that are not included in the budget are respecking my builds. So for example, I have pretty much a leveled character for every class except for Ranger. And I don't want to take the time to level a new build. If I'm going to make a 10 div build every day, I can't afford to be doing the entire campaign, leveling a character to 90 plus. I can't do that, so I just respec a build. And that's not included in the budget because the idea is it's a character that I would be playing all the way from the get-go. I'd know what my passives are, and I wouldn't need to respec if I was just making this character fresh anyways. So that's not included in the budget. 2020 gems I pay for the GCP because you need a GCP to level a 20 gem and get it quality. The idea is if I was getting to level 90 plus and getting to Ubers, I would have done enough content to have acquired the XP to get those gems levels. So those aren't included in the budget. But if I get anything with alternate quality, anything with what's the word? Alternate quality, awakened gems, level 21 gems, all that sort of stuff, I will pay for those things specifically. Hopefully that makes some sense. I've learned from my experience doing these, the best way to dodge the ball phase is literally just small sidesteps. Small sidesteps are the key, in my opinion, for doing something like Uber Shaper. The ball phase, at least. The ball phase... Oh, we killed him. I was actually faster than I didn't realize we were doing that much damage. So our damage is actually really good when the boss is on half HP. It actually does pretty decent. And that's a look of a build with 10 Divines, late in League, that is not necessarily meta or anything. Just trying out the Conk Path node. As for what else I went for my rare weapon, I was just trying to get, like, suppressed. That was my 2 mod I was going for. I RNG'd into Bleed Immune, which didn't really save me. All the deaths I died were basically from me getting one-shot by a big fizz attack for the most part. So that didn't really save me, but I will say this. What I noticed from playing with this mod, this never clicked with me before, which I feel kind of stupid for just learning this now, which is traps in lab, pretty much all their damage is bleed. Because when I went into lab and I did a gift lab for this character to try to get a crit chance boot enchant, because that's like free crit chance for trap builds, but I didn't end up getting one, so we lost some crit chance there, which is it's whatever. That might have been the difference in us doing Uber Exarch and Uber Cirrus, to be honest. With how close I had those bosses to dying, that crit chance boot enchant probably would have been the difference. I might have gone 7 for 7, but whatever, it's too late to go back now. But anyways, besides the point, this Bleed Avoid node, I noticed my character did, like, traps didn't feel dangerous. Even in the gift lab where the traps are dealing like twice the damage or whatever, this made them feel not dangerous. So if you ever get bleed immunity in your build, if you want to do if you like labs or whatever, I guess this is like, it's pretty sick. And then I have random like plus 10 res, 30 flat life. This is kind of whatever nodes. I was just trying to get the suppress node with the Conk Path, or the Purifying Flame Chaos node. And then for my Void Battery, I just added a random tree to a Void Battery and I got 0.7% mana regen. Nothing else on here was remotely useful at all. But I said, you know what? I'll take 0.7 mana regen. In the end, I think it helps me out a little bit with my mana problem, but I think ultimately the real key is, instead of running Nziri's Promise, I always should have been running this Mana Flask, which makes my mana sustain much more consistent with a bit of reduced mana cost and the Enduring Mana Flask. That's the real difference. I probably should have just never been running this, which, it's hindsight. I knew going into it, I thought, oh, I do have mana problems, but then I just was way too lazy to go and fix it. I was like, I want to go fight these Ubers and see what happens. So, anyways, that is the Chaos Purifying Flame Occultist Trapper. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Hopefully you look forward to the future 10 div builds. I plan to do at least probably about 6 more, so we'll see how they go. As always, thanks for watching. Take care, Exiles, and peace out.